If you want to get into Melbourne High, Mac.Rob, Nossal, or Suzanne, Cory, then on the Selective Entry Exam, writing is one of the big sections that a lot of people really struggle with. They struggle to come up with creative ideas. They struggle to write consistently. And so in today's video, I'm going to share all the key test tips that you need that will allow you to really improve your creative writing skills and consistently write pieces that will get you 8, 9, and 10 out of 10. So you have the best possible chance of getting into these schools. For a super quick introduction, my name's Charlie. I'm the head tutor of the Select Entry Accelerator program. In the last 12 months, I've helped well over 500 students prepare for this exam. So I've seen a lot of students improve their creative writing skills, and I've seen what's worked, what allows them to get top scores, but also what doesn't work quite as well. And so that's what we're going to be sharing in today's video. Now, the most basic thing is what is creative writing or what is narrative writing? Now, really when we say creative writing on this exam, most of the time, when I say most of the time, every single time I've seen the exam so far, which is last 10, 15, 20 years, they always require you to write a story, essentially. And so that's kind of what the focus of this video is going to be on, how to write a really good narrative, how to write a really good story, because that's the key skill that you want to have going into the exam. So you're ready for that type of question. Now, narrative pieces, they require you to write a story based on a provided prompt. For example, the prompt might be something like this: you're the toughest student in your class. Write a story based on this. Now, the hardest thing a lot of people initially find is, well, how do you come up with really good ideas? And the key thing is you have to understand what is a story. What is a story? What is a narrative? Narrative story means the same thing. What does a really good story have? And there's two key things that every good story has. It has a character and it has a problem. And the second part there is really the most important. There has to be a problem. If there's no problem, you don't really have a story. You just have a boring series of events. If I told you this morning I woke up, I walked down the street, had a look around, and then I came home, you would say, well, okay, that's not very interesting. That's not an interesting story at all because there was no problem. Whereas if I said I woke up, I walked down the street, as I got downstairs, I noticed that the window was smashed. I looked around, there was nothing, walked a little bit towards the end of my driveway, and there on the floor, I saw a massive rock. Well, now that's the start of the story because there's a problem. And so stories really do need problems to be interesting. And so to write a story, you need two key things. You need a character who's facing a problem. And that's why when you know you need those two key things, when they ask you write a story, write a creative piece, that's what you want to be thinking. You want to be thinking, okay, what problem could there be around this prompt? So for example, you are the toughest student in your class. Maybe you're normally the bully. You're normally picking on people, but then another student has come up to you and they've cornered you. And you're in a bit of an uncomfortable situation. That could be the start of a story. Another example, this here is a prompt, the local fish and chip shop. Now, when you look at this initially comes across as a very boring prompt. It's a fish and chip shop. What could possibly happen there? But there's so many things that could happen. For example, maybe you go to this fish and chip shop every single week, every Tuesday night. It's your habit, it's your routine. You finish school, you go there to have your favorite fish and chips, then you walk across the beach and relax. This time though, you walk into the store, you look over to see Greg, who normally serves you, store's empty. There's sort of, looks like there's been a few people around, but there's no one in the store. And you think, well, where's Greg? He's always been here. I've been going here for a long period of time. What's happened? There's a bit of a sense of mystery there. There's a problem. There's something that's gone wrong here. We could also have it that maybe you're the owner of the store and you turn up and you've been robbed. Maybe you go into the store and you're setting up for the day and you hear someone in the back room doing something dodgy there. There's so many problems that you could come up with, and it's so easy to come up with ideas once you know that a story, it needs a character who's facing a problem. They're the two key things. Now, the structure that we normally recommend for stories to make it a little bit more engaging, because yes, you can use a normal structure, which a normal structure for a story is you have a beginning, then you have a middle, and then you have an end. But what that leads to for most students is they start their story with something like John is a tall boy who lives in the area of Brighton. He loves eating fish and chips, and one morning he wakes up and walks into his store. Now, that's not particularly interesting. It's not a very interesting start to the story. And so we recommended a slightly different structure. It still has a beginning, middle, and somewhat of an end. So it still has a story structure. It's still a story, but it's designed for tests to make the story really interesting in 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, which is how much time you've actually got to write on the selective entry exam. And so that's probably one quick thing before we go into the structure of the story, how I'd recommend you structure it. On the selective entry exam in Victoria, so if you want to get into Melbourne High, Mac.Rob, Nossal or Suzanne, Cory, generally you're given 40 minutes for writing and you've got 2 pieces to write. One of them is generally more of a creative story, which is what we're going through here. The other one is normally more of an essay, a persuasive essay or a discussion essay, which we'll talk about in another video. And so you've got 20 minutes. You don't have a huge amount of time. And so what that means is in that 20 minutes, you need to be really fast with being able to come up with what's the problem? What's the problem that your story is going to be centered around? And you want to generally have a clear structure that you use every single time. If you just walk into the exam and come up with something random and just structure it in a random way, yes, it could definitely end up being good. There's no doubt about that. But most of the time, it's probably not going to be good. The way that you get really good at writing and you write 8, 9, 10 out of 10 pieces every single time, even when you hate the prompt or even when you're tired, is you have a clear structure that you follow. It makes it a bit formulaic, yes, but this is what the best students do on the selective entry exam. I'll show you a good example from one of our past students from this year on what they did with this structure. But it's also what people do in years 11 and year 12 to write consistently well. They don't just make something random up on the exam day. They have a structure that they use and they tweak it and adapt it to the prompt. And so what we normally recommend is you want to have 5 paragraphs. Each paragraph has a very specific purpose. The first paragraph is a problem paragraph. And so in this paragraph, the story begins with your character facing a problem. So rather than having a really boring beginning like I told you before, we could have the beginning that, let's say, the local fish and chip shop, Jenny, she went to a local fish and chip shop, but it was unexpectedly closed. And so in this first paragraph, Jenny, she's always been to this fish and chip shop every single week. She turns up, she looks there, and it's closed. And as she peers inside, she can see it looks like there's been some sort of disturbance in there. There's a fish on the floor. There's some chips on the tables. And that never happens. The owner's very careful with keeping everything clean. So she immediately knows there's some sort of problem here. So for this prompt, paragraph 1, Jenny turns up to the fish and chip shop. It's closed, but she looks inside and she can see that something's a bit off. Something's not quite right. In the second paragraph, now this one is really important. It's where we learn about the settings and the characters and set a bit of the backstory. Because the first paragraph should hook people in because there's a problem. Turned up to the fish and chip shop and it's closed. But you're probably wondering, well, what is this fish and chip shop? Why is she going there? How often does she go there? Does she know the owners? Where are they? You've got all those basic questions. And so in the second paragraph, that's where we then fill in all that information, which makes it interesting then. And so in that second paragraph, we could say, well, Jenny had been visiting this shop for years and she had a special connection with the owner, Mr. Collins. And maybe she goes to this store every single week and normally it's always open. It's never not been open for the last 5-10 years. And the owner, Mr. Collins, he's very careful to make sure that things are always clean before he closes the store. And so the fact that she's turned up, it's closed, that's one warning sign. But then also there's mess in there, that's a second warning sign. And so as a reader, you start to think, okay, something's gone wrong here. I wonder what it is. Now in the third paragraph, this is where the problem gets worse. So this is probably the easiest paragraph to write because whatever the problem was at the start of the story, now it's just got a whole lot worse. So in the example that I just gave you there, maybe Jenny notices more things about the store that make her worried. She sees uneaten food, glasses on the countertop, maybe some smashed glass on the floor. And so things are starting to not look very good for Mr. Collins and the fish and chip store. The problem is getting worse and worse and worse. And then the fourth paragraph is a really important one because at the end of the third paragraph, things should not be looking very good. You got this fish and chip shop. Jenny turned up. It's closed. It's normally always open. There's a lot of suspicious things, fish and chips on the floor, broken glass. Things look a little bit amiss. No sign of Mr. Collins. And the reader should be thinking, okay, this is not good. Fish and chip shop is in big trouble. Mr. Collins is not in a good situation. What the best stories do is they offer the reader a glimmer of hope. They temporarily trick the reader into thinking the problem has been solved. It hasn't been, but they trick the reader into thinking it has. And so in this fourth paragraph, what you want to do is you want to almost solve the problem, but then not solve it. For example, she notices a light on in the storage room. So, for example, she's looking around the fish and chip shop. She looks into the back of the storage room. She can see the lights on. She thinks she can see maybe someone in there. It looks a little bit like Mr. Collins, and she thinks, oh, that's good. He probably just got here. Maybe there was a bit of mess. He was tired. He was sick the day before. It's all good. I'll go in there and have a look at it and just help him out, get himself set up. And so at the start of this fourth paragraph, we want to trick the reader into thinking the problem's almost been solved. There's a light on, looks like Mr. Collins is just in the back room, all good. I'll go there and help him, no problems at all. But then you want to not make it solved. So Jenny walks to the cupboard, she opens the door, she looks inside, lights on, no sign of Mr. Collins at all. And so then you're thinking, oh wow, what's happened here? And so this fourth paragraph is really important because we want to almost solve the problem. That's why we say it's called the almost solution. But then we want the character to hit a brick wall where the problem looks even more unsolvable than ever before. And so we have a look at a quick recap of this. Problem 1, the story begins with your character facing a problem. Jenny turns up to the store, it's closed, things look a bit suspicious. Paragraph 2, we learn about who Jenny is and where she is. She comes to the store all the time, she knows the owner, it's normally always open. This is very suspicious. Paragraph 3, problem gets worse. She looks inside, she sees even more things amiss than what she first expected. Fish and chips on the floor, glass on the ground. Things are looking really not that good. Fourth paragraph, we trick the reader for just a moment into thinking that the story's all done, that there was nothing wrong at all in the first place, by saying she can see a light on in the back storage cupboard. Often Mr. Collins is out there. She thinks, oh, all good. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to see him. I'll help him. Maybe he was sick the day before or whatever. But she goes there and she opens the door and the light's on, but he's not there, which is even more crazy than even before. And then finally, in the final paragraph, we want to leave the story at an element of climax. And so this is where Jenny says, that's it. I need to go upstairs. Mr. Collins lives above this store. I'm going to go up there right now and see what's happening. And so she walks upstairs. She opens the door to his room. She looks over and her jaw drops. That's the end of the story. Now, there's one key thing that we've done there. So we have ended the story at the climax. The reason why we do that is we leave it at the highest point of tension. If I told you she opened the door and Mr. Collins was there and he was a bit sick and he said sorry about that, you'd be like, that was it? That was the whole story? It ends at a bit of a point of, okay, which is not what we want when it's an exam. We want to leave it at a point of tension where you're wondering what's happening. But we do want to give a hint of the solution. We do want to give a hint of the solution just to show the examiners that the piece is complete. If I said, I walked upstairs and I opened the door and then I just stopped writing there, the examiner would probably just assume that you would run out of time. Whereas if you say, I opened the door and fear gripped my body, tension howled through my body at an alarming rate, it's clear to the examiner that you've seen something. There's a resolution there, but there's an element of question in the reader's mind. And so the key thing is in the final paragraph, we do want to leave it at a point of climax, but we do want to give a hint as to what the solution is. That's kind of the key thing there. And so this is a structure we really recommend using. You can get really good at writing this structure and it'll become very easy with you, but it all stems down to one thing, which is there should be a character who's facing a problem. That's kind of the core thing. And so what I'd recommend doing is just look at different prompts that could come up, look at different images like this one here, and think what's every possible problem that could occur in a fish and chip shop. There's a lot. Maybe even something really basic. You order some fish and chips and it's cold and you're scared about telling them, do you mind if I have some more fish and chips? Or you order some fish and chips and it makes you sick. Or you order some fish and chips and a bird comes and swoops and takes your fish away as soon as you sit down at the beach. There's so many problems that could come and it makes it very easy to come up with ideas. Now, that's the structure that we want to use. In terms of how you actually structure your time, so you've got 20 minutes to write, this is normally what we recommend. We recommend the first probably 3 minutes, so about 15% of your time, which on the Selective Entry exam is going to be about 3 minutes, you want to spend planning. Now, planning is very important because when I say planning, what I mean is figuring out what's going to be in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you have that clear, if you just write down a few notes on, okay, this is what's going to be in paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's very easy then when you start writing just to churn through it, just to get it out there, and it will be structured really well. And what normally happens when I run in-person exams and there's hundreds of people in the exam hall and I walk around looking at their writing, the people who start writing right away, probably 95% of the time, their writing is not very good at all. It is not structured very well because they just started writing. They were so anxious to get something on paper that it's not structured very well. It's barely a story. Whereas people who spend a little bit more time, they plan it properly, then you can just churn through your writing really quick, get it all down on paper, and it's going to be structured really well and have a good story to it. And so spending 3 minutes at the start, just relaxing yourself, planning your story, making sure there's a clear character facing a problem, you know what's going to be in each paragraph, is very crucial. Then you're going to jump into the writing time. This is probably normally about 15 minutes or more. So you've spent about 3 minutes on planning, about 15 minutes or more on writing, where you just write what's based on the plan. You don't have to think, you just write. Makes it nice and easy. And then at the end, you do want to spend a little bit of time for editing. Now, personally, I like to edit as I go. So I edit as I go and I write a few lines and then I read and edit. But the biggest thing I'd say for editing by a mile, which normally most people in our programs would have heard me say this a lot of times, is you want to read your writing out aloud in your head. You want to read it out aloud because that's really where you determine the sentences that are bad. Because what happens for most students, once they know how to structure the piece okay, the next thing is that very often the sentences don't sound too good. They're really long, they're lacking punctuation. If I read them out aloud, I'd run out of breath or people would just say it sounds a bit weird. And so in this editing time, this is where you can pick those things up. You can read it out aloud, think, okay, doesn't really make much sense. I need to fix that. And you can tweak it a little bit. So this is important, particularly when you're still learning how to write really well before the exam. You want to spend a lot of time editing afterwards, understanding how you can improve it. Because the thing I always say is if you can't write a 10 out of 10 piece in 10 hours, you're not going to be able to write it in 20 minutes. You're going to write it an even worse piece. And so at the start, it's probably worth just not worrying about the time limit too much, just being able to write a good piece overall. And then you can condense that down into 20 minutes later on. Because ultimately, if you can't write a 10 out of 10 piece in 10 hours, no hope in 20 minutes. So that's one key thing there. So in terms of how you structure your time, 3 minutes at the start for planning, very important. 15 minutes of writing where you just whip through it. And then a few minutes left at the end there for editing, where you want to read it out loud in your own mind. Obviously, you can't speak in the exam hall. To try and find those sentences that don't sound too good. Now, we're going to have a quick look at a sample piece before we wrap up today's session. This sample piece really is as good as it gets. You'll get 50 out of 50 in our internal feedback scale. But that leads me to an important thing, which is you want to get feedback on your writing. If you're writing and then not getting feedback, I can almost guarantee, because I think we've had close to 2,000 essays marked in the last 12 months. The people who just write 10 essays over the course of a week and don't get feedback, every single one has the same problem. They just do the same issue again and again and again and again and again. And ultimately, it's annoying because it just wastes your own time. And so I really would recommend once you write a piece, get feedback of some kind. If you can't, for some reason, get any external feedback, then at least read through it yourself and think, okay, this is what I've written. Maybe compare it to the piece I'm about to show you. This is what they wrote. How is it from a structure standpoint? Was it structured well? How were the sentences? If I read them out aloud, do they make sense? But you really want to at the very least do that. Otherwise, you're just going to do what a lot of people do, write a bunch of essays and see no improvement from them, which is just a waste of time at the end of the day. Now, this piece here, you don't have to write a piece this good to get into selective schools. This piece is realistically 50 out of 50. It's a year 11, 12, beyond that level piece. But this student was able to write it in the 20-minute time limit. So we'll have a look at it now. And most importantly, we'll look at, well, how did it follow the structure that we spoke about earlier today? So it says here, the rusty pickup truck rattled down the deserted street, dust swirling in its wake. And so one key thing they've done here is descriptive language. Rather than just saying the pickup truck drove down the street, they've created a vivid image in our mind. They've painted a picture in our mind, which is what the best writing does. The once lively town was now a ghost, storefronts shuttered, paint peeling, and a sense of forgotten memories lingering. Silas parked outside his childhood home, the weeds choking the once vibrant flower beds. His chest tightened like a knot tangled in time. He came to Mill Road at the corner of Brightstone for a reason which had haunted him for decades. And so right away here, this student has done it in a bit of an advanced way. There is a problem though. This paragraph is really setting up a problem, which is this person's returned to his childhood home and for a very specific reason, and a reason that's haunted him for decades. So there's a problem there. He's actually teased the problem a little bit. He hasn't really exactly told us what that problem is, but we know that he's returned there and there's some sort of issue. There's some sort of mystery. There's some sort of internal problem that he's had, which has prevented him from coming back here. So this is quite an advanced problem. Most of the time, I'd recommend just choosing quite a simple problem, particularly when you're starting. So for example, there was a really good prompt, which a lot of our students wrote on, which was just a tram on the tracks. Now, you could do an advanced problem like this, but a lot of people who wrote good pieces, they just did the problem where you're on the tram, you see a ticket inspector, you reach down to your pocket, you don't have a ticket, and you think, oh no, I've got to get off. It's very easy to write on something like that. And so I would recommend at the start, pick an easier problem than this. This is fairly advanced. but eventually you can do things like this if you would want. Key tip with problem, try and make it something that happens in about 5 to 10 minutes. Don't make it, the problem is that you need to invade another country or some ginormous big thing. Make it very, very small. You forgot your ticket, you don't know what to do. Your fish and chips are cold. You don't know if you should go up to someone and say that it's cold because you're scared. Something really simple like that. So let's keep reading. Half past his lifetime now, Silas hadn't been back in 40 years. So you can see what they're doing in this second paragraph here is they're giving us some context on who the characters are and where they are. Mainly who the characters are so far. Back then, the town buzzed with laughter and adventure. His heart ached for his best friend Gideon. They were once inseparable, their dreams echoing through the streets, yet a petty argument broke out at the weekly Sunday lunch once. It turned into a violent fight where their rivalry burned hot for weeks. Silas and his family eventually moved out of town, leaving Gideon in the dust. The guilt had festered, a constant reminder to the friendship he'd lost. Today he was determined to find Gideon to make amends. So now things are starting to make sense. We know there's a character facing a problem. They're coming back to childhood town to make amends. We know a little bit about him. We know why he hasn't been back. So this second paragraph here does a good job on filling us in on the backstory. And so this third paragraph now should be where the problem gets worse to some extent. Silas fumbled a rusty padlock, the door creaking open. Inside the room was filled with the old chicken seasoning Gideon's mother would always cook with. So you can see when you give specific details like that, it makes it feel very real. It pained Silas to see the house completely abandoned. To his right was a child's painting clung to the wall with 2 stick figures labelled Silas and Gideon, signed with a tag of forever by his teacher. So again, this is quite an advanced way of advancing the problem in that it kind of makes his internal sense of despair or concern become even worse, seeing that there. In the tram example, you'll just do it that the ticket inspectors are walking towards you and you feel stressed. They're getting closer and closer, they're eyeing you off and you don't know what to do. So that's probably a simpler way of doing it. Let's keep reading. Then a creak from the floorboard upstairs. Could it be Gideon? Hope surged, a fragile flame against decades of guilt. Silas' hand trembled on the attic ladder. He hesitated as the door hung ajar, yet the attic was just as he remembered. Boxes, dusts, and shafts of sunlight. So this student's actually very effectively done in very few sentences what we want to do in that fourth paragraph, where we tease that the problem's about to be solved, Gideon's about to be there. That he hears a creak. Could it be Gideon? Hope surges. He opens the attic ladder and door, but then the attic was just empty. And so he teased the solution, but then he pulled it back, and now there's no sign of solution in sight. So they've done that very well here. In the case of the tram inspector, the more simple example, it could be the ticket inspector, they're eyeing you off, they're walking towards you, but then they walk past you, and you think, oh, that's so lucky. I don't need to worry about them. But then, actually, 2 of them walk who are in plain clothes, and they say, can I see your Mikey? And you go, oh, it's not good. Finally, he looked around and was stopped by a mysterious cloaked figure hunched in the corner of the room. It wasn't Gideon's familiar form, but a man just as weathered as this town. Very nice language. Their eyes met, shock, a tremor in the man's hands, a flicker of recognition. Gideon, the call was barely a whisper, heavy with unspoken words. And so you can see here, they've ended well on a climax. There's this figure that comes up to us. We assume it's probably Gideon, but we don't know for sure. But it definitely feels complete, that's for sure. So this is a very high quality piece of writing. In terms of the more simple example that I was giving around being on a tram, how I'd probably structure that one is in the first paragraph, you would have the character facing the problem. You're on the tram, you realize you don't have the ticket, and you see the ticket inspectors and you say, oh, no, that's not good. Backstory, you're on the way to an important exam. You can't afford to get off because you're going to be late for the exam. And so you need to stay on the tram, but you don't really want to get a fine. The third paragraph, problem gets worse. You see the ticket inspectors walking towards you. You're feeling stressed. Fourth paragraph, problem almost gets solved. Looks like they walk past you, but then there's 2 others standing right in front of you and you go, oh no, didn't get away with it. Final paragraph, the tram halts to a stop. It's at the stop and you get up and you start running. Could be the ending. Start running towards the exam hall. And so that's a simpler way of structuring the story that's not quite as advanced as this one here, but still good, still makes sense. And so just before we wrap up today's video, there's one final thing which we will go through is what to do from here. So we've covered quite a bit in today's session. We've spoken about what is creative writing in the first place, how to structure your writing, how to spend your time, how we need planning at the start, then we're going to write in the middle, then we're going to do editing at the end. We've then looked at a good example piece that's quite advanced, and And we've broken it back and looked at a simpler example, which I came up with about a ticket inspector. And so the final thing is what to do from here. Now, what I would recommend is there's a few stages of development to writing. We're not going to be able to start writing a piece on this level right away, but we can work our way towards it. And this really what this here is for. So the first thing you want to get right is just structure. I wouldn't worry about anything else. I wouldn't try and make your writing sound amazing. Just get the structure right. Just learn the structure from this video, master it, make sure you're confident with it. You can do it every single time. Even if you hate the prompt, you can still do it. And that's going to guarantee you probably about a 5 out of 10 if you can just write a structured story. That's the first thing. The second thing is then you want to just iron out any punctuation, spelling, and grammar errors. Because you're so focused on structure, it's inevitable there'll be a few of these errors. That's okay. Just polish them. Get to the stage where you can write according to the structure with basically no errors. Punctuation, spelling, and grammar. So things sound fine. There's no spelling errors. There's no grammar errors because these things do take away from the quality of your writing. That's going to get you about a 6 out of 10 if you can do these two things. Next level up is then sensory imagery. So really what this is the difference between, let's have a look at an example here. The difference between the town was busy and the town buzzed with laughter and adventure. It's saying the same thing, but the town was busy is just really blatantly telling us the town was busy, whereas the town buzzed with laughter and adventure is showing us. And so sensory and imagery is really about showing rather than telling, making it very vivid, rather than just saying John was sad, showing, well, if John was sad, what would he be doing? What would he look like? What would he be doing exactly, and describing that in vivid detail so it can paint an image in our mind. And so that's kind of the next level up, adding that into your writing. If you can do that, realistically, you're probably going to get at least 7 out of 10. If you can do these 3 steps, you may well get an 8 out of 10 already, but I'm just going to say 7 out of 10 just to be conservative. Fourth thing then is character development. So this is really making the reader care about your characters, which in this case, they certainly did. We really developed a bit of a sense of connection for Silas. We kind of felt bad for him. We hoped things worked out okay. And so character development in this piece was really good. Then the final one is language and expression, which is adding more advanced vocab, making the flow of the sentences more advanced and nuanced and subtle and sophisticated. But they're really the final things to worry about. Most people don't really end up getting towards that point. And so first step, nail structure. Then make sure punctuation, spelling, and grammar is good. Then do sensory imagery. If you can do these first 3, most likely that's probably enough to get in. Realistically, write a piece that's good enough to get in. These 2 ones here are just a cherry on top that can elevate you to the next level. And that's what I'd recommend as a starting point from here. And so thanks for joining us for this video where we ran through all the key tips that I've seen over the last 12 months that help students find creative writing a whole lot easier. If you're looking to join one of our tutoring programs and get tutoring from me and our other tutors, there's a link below this video where you can book in for a call with us and get more information. Otherwise, we're going to be posting more videos like this on YouTube for all the other sections as well. And so you can stay tuned for those as well. So thanks for joining us for today's session. I'll see you in the next video very soon. And otherwise, good luck for your next writing piece.